Lorenzo Castellano didn't believe in coincidences. At 42 years old, he'd built an empire in the shadows of Chicago by noticing things other people missed. The hesitation in a handshake, the tremor in someone's voice during negotiations. The way eyes darted when lies were being told. So, when he opened the supply closet on the third floor of his Gold Coast mansion at 2:17 in the morning, searching for extra linens because his guest room sheets had been stained with red wine, he noticed everything about the woman curled up on the floor between boxes of cleaning supplies. She was small. That was his first thought. Tiny, really. Maybe 5'3" at most, with dark auburn hair that had escaped from what looked like it had once been a neat braid. She wore the standard uniform his housekeeping staff used. Black pants and a white button-down shirt, both wrinkled now and smudged with what looked like dust from the closet floor. She was sleeping, deeply, from the look of it, her breathing slow and even, one arm tucked under her head, as a makeshift pillow, the other wrapped around her middle like she was trying to hold herself together even in sleep, and she was covered in bruises. Lorenzo's jaw tightened as he took in the evidence. Her face, turned toward him in sleep, bore a fading yellow-green bruise along her left cheekbone. Her right wrist, visibly where her sleeve had ridden up, showed dark purple finger marks, fresh ones, maybe a day or two old, the kind of marks that came from someone grabbing hard, holding tight, refusing to let go. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. He should have woken her immediately. Should have demanded an explanation for why one of his household staff was sleeping in a closet instead of in the staff quarters where she belonged. Should have been angry about the breach of protocol, the unprofessionalism of it. Instead, Lorenzo found himself crouching down slowly, keeping his movements quiet so he wouldn't startle her. Up close, he could see more. A split lip that was healing but still visible. Bruises on her neck, partially hidden by her collar, that looked like thumbprints. Someone had tried to strangle her. Recently, his hands curled into fists. In Lorenzo Castellano's world, violence was sometimes necessary. He wasn't naive about the realities of the life he'd chosen. But there were rules, lines you didn't cross. And putting your hands on someone weaker, someone who couldn't fight back, someone who was clearly terrified enough to hide in a closet rather than seek help that was a line Lorenzo, enforced with brutal efficiency. The woman steered, a small sound escaping her throat. Not quite a whimper, but close. Her face scrunched up like she was having a nightmare, and her breathing quickened, becoming shallow and panicked, even though she was still asleep. "Hey," Lorenzo said softly. Not loud enough to scare her, just enough to penetrate whatever dream had her in its grip. "You're safe. Wake up." Her eyes flew open. Green, he noticed. A pale green like sea glass, currently wide with terror as she scrambled backward, hitting the closet wall, her hands coming up defensively in front of her face. "Please," she gasped. "Please, I'm sorry. I'll leave. I just needed somewhere safe for a few hours. Please don't stop." Lorenzo kept his voice calm, non-threatening, the same tone he used when negotiating with people who were one wrong word away from doing something stupid. "I'm not going to hurt you, but I need you to tell me your name." She stared at him, chest heaving, clearly trying to decide if he was telling the truth. Her eyes darted to the closet door behind him, calculating distances, escape routes. He could practically see her mind working through scenarios. "Ella," she finally whispered. "Ella Monroe. I started working here 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Chen hired me." Lorenzo nodded slowly. Patricia Chen was his head housekeeper. Had been for 15 years. She ran his household staff with the efficiency of a military general and the discretion of a priest in a confessional. If Patricia had hired this woman, there was a reason. "Why are you sleeping in a closet, Ella?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment he thought she might cry. But she blinked hard, forcing the tears back with visible effort. "I didn't have anywhere else to go tonight. I thought if I just stayed here until morning, no one would know." "I'm sorry, Mr. Castellano. I'll pack my things and leave right now." "That's not what I asked." Lorenzo shifted, sitting fully on the closet floor across from her, blocking the exit but also making himself less imposing. If he stood, she'd feel trapped. This way, they were on the same level. "I asked why you're sleeping in a closet, and why you're covered in bruises." Aya's hand flew to her cheek, touching the fading bruise there like she'd forgotten it existed. "I fell," Try again. I'm clumsy, always running into things. Lorenzo's eyes moved deliberately from her face to her wrist, to her neck, then back to her eyes. Those are finger marks, Ella. Someone grabbed you. Someone hurt you. And judging by the fact that you're hiding in my closet at 2 a.m. instead of sleeping in staff quarters or your own home, I'm guessing whoever hurt you is the reason you don't have anywhere else to go. She was shaking now, full body tremors that made her look even smaller than she already was. Lorenzo wanted to reach out, to steady her, but he kept his hands still. The last thing she needed was another man touching her without permission. It's complicated, she managed. Then uncomplicate it for me. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then something seemed to break inside her. The walls she'd been holding up, crumbling under the weight of exhaustion and fear, and the simple fact that someone was finally asking questions. My boyfriend, she whispered. Ex-boyfriend, Marcus. He's a bouncer at a club in River North. We lived together for 2 years, but he started getting violent about 6 months ago. Pushing at first, then hitting. Last week I tried to leave, packed my things while he was at work, but he came home early and her voice broke. She pressed her hand over her mouth, trying to hold in whatever sounds wanted to escape. He beat you, Lorenzo finished quietly. Ella nodded, tears finally spilling over and streaming down her cheeks. He said if I tried to leave again, he'd kill me. Sighed he'd find me wherever I went. I didn't believe him at first, but Marcus knows people, dangerous people. His boss at the club has connections too. She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening as she seemed to realize who she was talking to. Lorenzo Castellano, owner of half the legitimate businesses in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood and all of the illegitimate ones. A man whose name was spoken in whispers in certain circles, with respect and fear in equal measure. A man whose import business imported more than just Italian wine and olive oil. To who? Lorenzo prompted, his voice still gentle but with steel underneath. His boss has connections to who, Ella? To organized crime, she whispered. To people like... She stopped again, but the implication hung in the air between them. People like you. Lorenzo felt something cold settle in his chest. So this Marcus thought he could terrorize a woman because his boss had mob connections. Thought those connections made him untouchable. It was a common mistake. People saw the violence, the power, the fear that men like Lorenzo could inspire, and they thought it gave them license to do whatever they wanted. They were wrong. What's Marcus's last name? Lorenzo asked. Why? Because I'm going to make sure he never touches you again. Ella shook her head frantically. You don't understand. If anyone goes after him, he'll know it was me. He'll find me. He said he'd kill me, Mr. Castellano, and I believe him. Do you believe me when I tell you that's not going to happen? She searched his face, looking for deception or empty promises. Lorenzo let her look. He had nothing to hide in this moment. When he made a promise, he kept it. That was one of the things that separated him from animals like Marcus. Why would you help me? Ella asked. I'm nobody. Just a maid who's been here 3 weeks. Why would you risk anything for me? It was a fair question. Lorenzo considered his answer carefully. He could tell her about the code he lived by, the rules that governed his world even when law and society didn't. He could explain that loyalty flowed both ways in his organization, that people under his roof were under his protection, whether they'd been there 3 weeks or 3 years. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than that. Because you work in my house, Lorenzo said finally. That makes you my responsibility. And because no one should have to sleep in a closet because they're afraid of being murdered by someone who's supposed to love them. Ella wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, smearing dust from the closet floor across her cheeks. His last name is Reeves. Marcus Reeves. He works at Voltage, that new club on Hubbard Street. His boss is someone named Dmitri Volkov. Lorenzo knew the name. Volkov was Russian mob, mid-level operator who ran a few clubs and thought having a couple of Chicago cops on his payroll made him invincible. He was small-time, barely worth Lorenzo's attention under normal circumstances. These weren't normal circumstances. Here's what's going to happen, Lorenzo said, his voice taking on the calm, authoritative tone that made people listen even when they didn't want to. You're going to get up, come with me, and I'm going to put you in one of the guest rooms. Not staff quarters. A real guest room with a lock on the door. Tomorrow, we'll figure out a more permanent solution. Mr. Castellano, I can't. Yes, you can. And you will. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. I don't allow people to get hurt on my property, Ella. That includes you. She looked at his hand like it might burn her. Lorenzo waited patiently, keeping his expression neutral. After what felt like an eternity, she reached out and placed her small hand in his. Her fingers were ice cold. The guest room Lorenzo led Ella to was on the second floor, far from the staff quarters and closer to his own private wing. It was decorated in shades of cream and gold, with a four-poster bed that looked like it belonged in a palace, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden, and an in-suite bathroom that was probably larger than Ella's entire apartment had been. She stood in the doorway, looking overwhelmed. This is too much. It's a room. Lorenzo moved past her, checking the locks on both the door and the windows. Satisfied they were secure, he turned back to face her. The bathroom is stocked with everything you need. There should be clean clothes in the dresser. My sister stays here sometimes when she visits. You're about the same size. Your sister? Gabriella. She's a lawyer in New York. Visits twice a year and leaves half her wardrobe behind. A slight smile touched his lips. Help yourself to whatever fits. Ella wrapped her arms around herself, still standing in the doorway like she was afraid to come inside. I don't understand why you're being so nice to me. Would you prefer I wasn't? No, She struggled to find the words. People like you aren't supposed to be nice to people like me. People like me? She flushed, realizing what she'd implied. I didn't mean, I know exactly what you meant. Lorenzo's voice was dry. Yes, I'm involved in activities that aren't entirely legal. Yes, I've done things that would make good citizens uncomfortable. But I have rules, Edja. Lines I don't cross. And one of those lines is simple. You don't hurt people who can't fight back. He moved toward the door, then paused beside her. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd initially thought. Mid-20s, maybe. Young enough to still believe in happy endings. Old enough to know that fairy tales were lies people told themselves to sleep better at night. Get some rest, he said quietly. Lock the door after I leave. No one will bother you here, I promise. Mr. Castellano? Her voice stopped him in the hallway. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you for... You don't repay kindness, Ella. You just accept it and pass it forward when you can. He closed the door behind him and waited until he heard the lock click into place. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Tony, he said when his head of security answered on the second ring. I need you to run a background check. Marcus Reeves works as a bouncer at Voltage. I want everything. Where he lives, where he drinks, who he knows, what he owes. And I want to know why Dmitri Volkov hired him. How fast do you need this? Tony Messina had been with Lorenzo for 12 years. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. Yesterday, Lorenzo ended the call and made another one. Patricia, I need to see you in my office. Now. 5 minutes later, his head housekeeper appeared in his study looking concerned. Patricia Chen was 63 years old, had worked for the Castellano family since Lorenzo's father was alive, and knew more about running a household than most people knew about anything. What happened? She asked, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. You only use that tone when something's wrong. Tell me about Ella Monroe. Patricia's expression shifted immediately to worry. Is she all right? Did something happen? That depends on your definition of all right. I found her sleeping in the third-floor supply closet covered in bruises. Jesus. Patricia closed her eyes briefly. I knew. Something was wrong. But she wouldn't tell me what. Said she was fine. Just going through a hard time. I should have pushed harder. How did she come to work here? Patricia opened her eyes. She came through an employment agency 3 weeks ago. Good references from previous employers. Background check came back clean. She was living with her boyfriend, but mentioned during the interview that she was looking for a new place. I got the impression the relationship wasn't going well. It wasn't going well because he was beating her. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia had seen a lot in her 63 years, but domestic violence always hit her hard. Her own mother had been in an abusive marriage before her father finally died when Patricia was 12. Do we know who? She asked quietly. Marcus Reeves. Bouncer at Voltage. Works for Dmitri Volkov. Patricia's expression hardened. Predit. What are you going to do? What do you think I'm going to do? Lorenzo. leaned back in his chair. No one terrorizes my people, Patricia. No one. Volkov has connections. He's not going to like you interfering with his employee's personal life. Then Volkov can take it up with me directly. Lorenzo's voice was cold. I'm not asking permission, and I'm not backing down. Ella Monroe works in my house, which means she's under my protection. Marcus Reeves is about to learn what that means. Patricia studied him for a long moment. You like her. I don't know her well enough to like or dislike her. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Patricia's voice softened. Lorenzo, be careful. This isn't just about protecting an employee. I can see it in the way you're talking about her. This is personal for you. Lorenzo wanted to argue, to tell Patricia she was reading too much into a simple act of decency, but the truth was more complicated. There had been something about finding Ella in that closet, small and scared and fighting so hard to survive, that had resonated with something deep in his chest. He'd been that scared once, a long time ago, before he'd built this empire, before he'd become the kind of man other men feared. He'd been 15 years old, alone on the streets after his father died and creditors came for everything the family owned. He'd slept in alleys and storage rooms and anywhere else that felt safe for a few hours. He remembered what it felt like to have nowhere to go, to be so tired that falling asleep sitting up in a closet felt like a reasonable option, to be so afraid that you'd rather risk hypothermia than risk being found. Maybe it is personal, Lorenzo admitted, but that doesn't change what needs to be done. Patricia nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Make sure Aja has everything she needs. Talk to her when she's ready. Find out if there's anything else going on that I should know about. Family she needs to contact. Possessions she needs to retrieve from the apartment she shared with Marcus. I want a complete picture. And what about her job? Is she still working here? Of course she's still working here. Why wouldn't she be? Because you just put her in a guest room instead of staff quarters. Because you're talking about going after her ex-boyfriend. Because this stopped being a normal employment situation the moment you found her in that closet. Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. I'm not saying any of this is wrong. I'm saying you need to think about what you're doing and make sure Aja understands what's happening. Lorenzo knew she was right. The lines were already blurring, and that could be dangerous for everyone involved. But the alternative, doing nothing, letting Marcus continue to terrorize Ella, pretending he hadn't seen those bruises, was unthinkable. I'll talk to her tomorrow, Lorenzo said. Make sure she understands the situation and what I'm offering. She can make her own choices about whether she wants my protection or prefers to handle this herself. Though they both knew what choice she would make. People in Ella's situation didn't have the luxury of pride. They took help where they could find it, even when that help came from dangerous men with complicated morals. After Patricia left, Lorenzo sat alone in his study watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere in his house, Ella was hopefully sleeping in a real bed, safe behind locked doors. Somewhere in the city, Marcus Reeves was probably sleeping too, unaware that he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. Lorenzo picked up his phone and made one more call. Dante, he said when his consigliere answered. I need to set up a meeting. Tomorrow night. You, me, Tony, and Dmitri Volkov. Tell him it's not optional. What's this about? Dante Romano had been Lorenzo's right hand for 20 years. He could hear the edge in his boss's voice. Someone who works for Volkov has been putting his hands on a woman, my woman, as of tonight. I'm extending her my protection, which means the situation needs to be resolved, permanently. There was a pause. Your woman? Lorenzo. What the hell is going on? I'll explain tomorrow. Just set up the meeting. He ended the call and stared at his reflection in the darkened window. Patricia was right. This was personal in ways that went beyond simple employee protection. But Lorenzo had learned a long time ago that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was ignore your instincts. His instincts were telling him that Ella Monroe was worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth whatever complications came from getting involved in her mess. So that's exactly what he was going to do. Aja woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, in a bed softer than anything she'd ever slept on, wearing clothes that weren't hers. For one disorienting moment, panic seized her chest. Then memory flooded back. The closet, Lorenzo Castellano finding her, the impossible, kindness of being given a safe place to sleep. She sat up slowly, taking in the room in daylight. It was beautiful in a way that made her uncomfortable. The kind of beauty that cost money she'd never have, that belonged to a world she'd never be part of. The cream-colored walls held tasteful art originals, probably, not prints. The furniture looked antique, the kind passed down through generations of wealthy families. Ella wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly acutely aware that she didn't belong here. She was a maid, a nobody running from an abusive ex. What right did she have to sleep in a room like this, to wear silk pajamas that probably cost more than her weekly salary? A knock on the door made her jump. Ella? A woman's voice, warm and kind. It's Patricia Chen. May I come in? Ella scrambled out of bed, finger-combing her tangled hair and trying to make herself presentable. Yes, of course. The door opened to reveal the head housekeeper carrying a tray with breakfast. Patricia was in her 60s with salt and pepper hair pulled into a neat bun and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. She'd been kind during Ella's interview and first weeks working here, but also professional, distant. Now she looked at Ella with something that resembled maternal concern. I brought you breakfast, Patricia said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. Figured you might not want to face the staff dining room just yet. Ella's stomach growled at the sight of scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and coffee that smelled like heaven. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a full meal. Thank you. You didn't have to. Sit down and eat, Patricia interrupted gently. We need to talk, but you need food first. You look like you've been running on empty for too long. That was an understatement. Ella sat at the table and forced herself to eat slowly, even though she wanted to inhale everything on the plate. Patricia watched her with an expression that made Ella want to cry, like someone actually cared whether she was okay. Mr. Castellano told me what happened, Patricia said after Ella had taken the edge off her hunger. About finding you in the closet. About Marcus. Ella's fork clattered against the plate. I should explain. You don't owe me an explanation, but I do owe you an apology. Patricia's voice was firm. I knew something was wrong. Saw the bruises you tried to hide. Noticed how jumpy you were, how you flinched every time someone approached you from behind. I should have asked more questions, should have made sure you were safe. It's not your fault. I lied to you. Said I was fine when I wasn't. You lied because you were scared. I understand that. Patricia leaned forward. But you need to understand something about Lorenzo Castellano. When he says you're under his protection, he means it. Completely. There are no half measures with him. I don't know what that means. It means that as of last night, you stopped being just an employee and became part of this household in a deeper way. It means Lorenzo is going to make sure Marcus Reeves never touches you again, and that protection isn't something you can refuse or negotiate. Once a Lorenzo sees that someone is his to protect, that's final. Ella's hands trembled around her coffee cup. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me. Then you shouldn't have ended up working in Lorenzo Castellano's house. Patricia's voice wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. Because now that he knows, now that you're here, there's no going back to how things were. Marcus made a mistake by hurting you. Lorenzo's going to correct that mistake. The only question is whether you cooperate or make things harder for everyone. Cooperate how? By staying here where you're safe. By telling Lorenzo everything he needs to know about Marcus, where he goes, who his friends are, what his patterns are. By trusting that for all Lorenzo's faults, and he has many, keeping his people safe is something he takes very seriously. Ella thought about the man who'd found her in that closet. The quiet authority in his voice, the way he'd sat on the floor to make himself less threatening, the genuine anger when he'd seen her bruises. She'd expected him to fire her, to be disgusted by the mess she'd brought into his home. Instead, he'd offered protection. What does he want in return? Ella asked quietly, because nobody gave something for nothing. That was a lesson she'd learned the hard way. Patricia smiled sadly. That's the question everyone asks. The answer is nothing. Lorenzo doesn't keep a tally. He protects his people because that's who he is. It's part of his code, the rules he lives by even when the rest of the world doesn't. But Ella stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence without being insulting. A criminal? Patricia finished dryly. Yes. He runs an organization that operates outside the law. He's done things that would make most people uncomfortable. But he has honor, Ella. More honor than plenty of so-called good citizens I've met. He doesn't lie, doesn't break promises, and doesn't allow anyone under his protection to be harmed. Ella absorbed this, trying to reconcile the image of a mob boss with the man who'd been so gentle last night. What happens now? Now you finish breakfast, take a shower, and then Lorenzo wants to see you in his study at 10. He'll explain what he's planning to do about Marcus. Patricia stood, smoothing her skirt. And Ella? Whatever he tells you, listen carefully. Lorenzo doesn't make idle threats. He makes promises. There's a difference. At exactly 10 o'clock, Ella stood outside Lorenzo's study with her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd showered, dressed in clothes that had been left for her jeans and a soft green sweater that actually fit, and tried to prepare herself for whatever was coming. She knocked softly. "Come in," Lorenzo's voice called. The study was impressive. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that looked read rather than decorative, and a massive mahogany desk that probably weighed more than a car. Lorenzo sat behind it, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, looking every inch the successful businessman. Except, successful businessmen didn't have that particular hardness around their eyes. That came from seeing things, doing things, that couldn't be undone. "Sit down, Ella," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. She sat, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Lorenzo studied her for a moment, then opened a folder on his desk. "I had my security team run a background check on Marcus Reeves last night. Interesting reading." He slid several photographs across the desk. Ella's stomach clenched when she saw Marcus's face, handsome in a rough way, with dark hair and the kind of build that came from hours at the gym. The gym and steroids, if she was being honest. Marcus Reeves, age 29. Lorenzo read from the report. Works as head of security at Voltage nightclub. Has a record, 2 assault charges that were dropped, 1 DUI, multiple complaints from former girlfriends that never went anywhere. His boss, Dmitri Volkov, is Russian mob with connections to various illegal operations throughout Chicago. Volkov keeps Marcus around because he's good with his fists and isn't afraid to cross lines. Lorenzo looked up from the report, his amber brown eyes meeting hers directly. "How long have you known Marcus was connected to organized crime?" "I didn't know, not really," Ella said. "He mentioned his boss had powerful friends, but I thought he was just trying to sound important. It wasn't until later, after he started hitting me, that I realized he wasn't lying. That the threats weren't empty." "What kind of threats?" Ella's throat tightened. "That if I tried to leave or told anyone what he was doing, he'd make sure I fled her. Disappeared. That Dimitri's people could make problems go away without leaving evidence. That nobody would believe me if I reported him because Dmitri had cops on his payroll." "Did he ever mention names? Specific officers who were taking Volkov's money?" "No. Just that trying to go to the police would be useless." Lorenzo closed the folder. "Here's what's going to happen. Tonight I'm meeting with Dmitri Volkov to discuss the situation. I'm going to make it clear that Marcus's behavior toward you is unacceptable and that it needs to stop. Permanently." Ella's eyes widened. "You're going to meet with his boss? Mr. Castellano, that's dangerous. If Volkov is as connected as you say, Volkov is a mid-level operator who thinks having a few cops and politicians in his pocket makes him important. He's not." Lorenzo's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "I, on the other hand, have been operating in this city for over 20 years. My reach is significantly longer than his. When I tell him, Marcus needs to be handled, he'll handle it." "What does handled mean?" Lorenzo hesitated, and Ella appreciated that he was choosing his words carefully. "It means Marcus will be fired from Voltage. It means Volkov will make it clear that you're not to be touched. It means if Marcus tries anything, there will be severe consequences." "You mean you'll hurt him?" "I mean I'll ensure he can't hurt you. There's a difference." Ella wanted to argue, to tell Lorenzo that violence wouldn't solve anything, that there had to be another way. But the truth was simpler and more brutal than that. There was no other way. Marcus had made his choices. He'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. And if she was being completely honest with herself, part of her, the part that still had bruises healing on her ribs, that still woke up gasping from nightmares where Marcus's hands were around her throat, that part wanted him to suffer. She was a terrible person for feeling that way. But she felt it. "Anyway, what do you need from me?" she asked quietly. "I need you to stay here, in this house, where my security can keep you safe. I need you to tell me everything you know about Marcus's patterns, where he lives, where he drinks, who his friends are. And I need you to trust me when I say I will keep you safe. I don't know how to trust anyone anymore." "Then, don't trust anyone. Just trust me." Lorenzo leaned forward, his expression intense. I found you sleeping in a closet because you had nowhere else to go, Ella. Because a man who should have protected you chose to hurt you instead. I'm offering you a chance to stop running, to stop being afraid. All you have to do is accept the offer. Ella looked at him, this dangerous man with his expensive suit, and his criminal empire and his unexpected kindness, and made a choice that would change everything. Okay, she whispered. I trust you. Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression. Satisfaction, maybe. Or relief. Good. Now tell me everything. For the next 3 hours, Ella told Lorenzo everything. About how she'd met Marcus at a coffee shop 18 months ago, how charming he'd been at first, how the relationship had seemed perfect until it wasn't. About the first time he'd pushed her just a shove, really, something she'd almost convinced herself was an accident. About how the pushes became slaps, the slaps became punches, and the punches became something worse. She told him about the night 2 weeks ago when she'd finally packed her things, determined to leave, how Marcus had come home early from work and found her bags by the door. How he'd grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the wall hard enough to crack the drywall. It said if I ever tried to leave again, he'd kill me, Ella said, her voice hollow with remembered fear. And then he'd find my sister in Michigan and make sure she knew it was my fault, that I'd brought this on our family. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. You have a sister? Emma. She's 23, finishing her degree at Michigan State. She doesn't know about any of this. I didn't want to worry her, didn't want to drag her into my mess. Does Marcus know where she lives? Where she goes to school? I never told him specifics, but he could find out. He's good at that, finding information about people, using it against them. Ella wrapped her arms around herself. That's one of the reasons I didn't run. I was afraid of what he'd do to Emma if I disappeared. Lorenzo made a note on the legal pad in front of him. I'll have my people put protection on your sister. Discreet surveillance to make sure Marcus doesn't go near her. She won't even know they're there. You can do that? In Michigan? I can do that anywhere in the country. Lorenzo's voice was matter of fact. My organization has reach. Ella, when I say you and your family are under my protection, I mean all of you. The scope of what he was offering hit Ella like a physical blow. This wasn't just about keeping her safe in Chicago. This was about making sure Marcus couldn't use anyone she loved as leverage. It was more than she dared to hope for. Thank you, she whispered, tears burning behind her eyes. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for. You don't. Lorenzo cut her off gently. That's not how this works. I'm not keeping a tally, Ella. I'm not going to show up in 6 months demanding payment for services rendered. You work in my house, which means you're mine to protect. That's all there is to it. The possessive way he said, mine, sent a shiver down Ella's spine that she tried very hard to ignore. This was about protection, nothing more. Lorenzo Castellano was a powerful man helping someone in need because it aligned with his personal code. She couldn't afford to read anything else into it. Where does Marcus live? Lorenzo asked, moving the conversation back to practical matters. An apartment in Wicker Park, 1600 block of North Polina Street. 3rd floor, apartment 3C. He's usually there from about 4 a.m. when he gets off work until around 2 p.m. when he goes to the gym, Apex Fitness on Milwaukee Avenue. He works out for 2 hours every afternoon, then goes home to sleep for a few hours before his shift at Voltage. Ella recited Marcus's schedule from memory, the patterns she'd learned in order to navigate around his moods and violence. He drinks at McGinty's pub most nights before work. Meets his friends, their other security guys from various clubs, some of Dmitri's people. Lorenzo wrote all of this down, his handwriting neat and precise. Does he carry a weapon? A knife. One of those folding ones that clip to his belt. And sometimes a gun, though he doesn't have a permit for it. He keeps it in a lockbox under the bathroom sink. Has he ever used either one on you? He threatened me with the knife once. Held it against my throat while he told me exactly what he'd do if I ever embarrassed him in front of his friends again. Her hand moved unconsciously to her neck, touching the spot where the blade had pressed against her skin. I'd asked him to stop drinking so much. He didn't like that. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Lorenzo's expression remained neutral, but something dark flickered in his eyes. When was this? About a month ago. That's when I started looking for a way out. I knew if I stayed, he was eventually going to kill me. Edge's voice broke. I found this job through an employment agency. Thought if I could just save up enough money for first and last month's rent somewhere, get a place he didn't know about, I could disappear. But I wasn't fast enough. You were smart enough to get hired here. That was fast enough. Lorenzo closed his notepad. You're safe now, Eja. I know you probably don't believe that yet, but you will. A knock on the study door interrupted them. Come in, Lorenzo called. A man entered who looked like he'd been designed, specifically to intimidate people. He was massive, at least 6'4", with the kind of build that came from years of serious weight training. His head was shaved, his face bore several scars, and his dark eyes assessed Eja with the cold efficiency of someone who'd spent decades evaluating threats. Tony, Lorenzo said by way of introduction. My head of security. Tony, this is Ella Monroe. Tony nodded once in Ella's direction, then turned his attention to Lorenzo. Got the information you wanted. Also set up the meeting with Volkov for tonight at 9. Neutral territory, that Italian place in Little Italy you like. Santino's. Good. What did you find? Tony pulled out his phone, scrolling through notes. Marcus Reeves is exactly the piece of work you thought he was. Besides the assault charges Ella mentioned, he's got a history of violence going back to high school. Suspended twice for fighting, expelled once for putting another kid in the hospital, did 6 months in county. Jail when he was 20 for aggravated battery, beat a guy outside a bar so badly he needed reconstructive surgery. Ella's stomach churned. She'd known Marcus was violent, had experienced it firsthand, but hearing his history laid out like this made it worse somehow. This wasn't a man who'd lost control a few times. This was a pattern, a choice he made again and again. What about Volkov's protection? Lorenzo asked. How deep does that go? Volkov's been vouching for Marcus with the other club owners, making sure he stays employed despite his record. He's also been paying off a few beat cops to look the other way when complaints come in. Nothing major. Marcus isn't important enough to warrant serious protection, but enough that he feels untouchable. He's not. No, he's not. Tony's smile was cold. You want me to handle this, or are you doing it yourself? I'll talk to Volkov first, see if he's reasonable. If he is, Marcus gets fired and warned off. If he's not, Lorenzo shrugged. Then we handle it another way. And if Marcus doesn't take the warning seriously, then he becomes an object lesson in why you don't touch what's mine. There was that word again, mine. Eja should have been bothered by the possessiveness, by the way Lorenzo talked about her like she was property to be protected. Instead, she felt something that might have been relief, or safety, or maybe just the first real hope she'd felt in months. Someone was finally on her side, someone with the power to actually do something about the nightmare her life had become. After Tony left, Lorenzo stood and moved to the window overlooking his gardens. I know this is a lot to process. You've gone from hiding in a closet to being under the protection of someone like me in less than 12 hours. If you need time to think about whether this is really what you want, I understand. What I want, Eja repeated. Mr. Castellano, what I want is to not wake up every morning wondering if today is Curtis, the day Marcus finally kills me. What I want is to stop looking over my shoulder every time I leave the house. What I want is to be able to sleep through the night without nightmares of his hands around my throat. She stood as well, surprised by the anger in her own voice. So yes, this is what I want. I want you to make him stop. I want to feel safe again. I want my life back. Lorenzo turned to face her, and for a moment their eyes met. Amber brown meeting pale green. Something passed between them in that look, understanding, recognition, a connection that went deeper than simple employee-employer dynamics. Then that's what you'll have, Lorenzo said quietly. I promise. The rest of that day passed in a strange blur. Patricia showed Eja to a different room, still a guest room, but smaller and more comfortable than the palace she'd slept in last night. This one had cream-colored walls covered in botanical prints, a queen-size bed with a navy comforter, and windows that overlooked the garden where spring flowers were just beginning to bloom. This is Isabella's old room, Patricia explained, as she helped Ella unpack the few belongings she'd brought to work. Lorenzo's younger sister. She lived here while she was in college, before she moved to New York for law school. It's beautiful. Eja touched the soft comforter, still unable to believe this was real. But I can't stay in a guest room permanently. What about the other staff? What will they think? Patricia gave her a knowing look. They'll think what they've already figured out, that you're under the boss's protection. That means you're not regular staff anymore, Ella. You're something else. What does that mean? It means you eat in the main dining room if you want, not the staff quarters. It means you have access to the whole house, not just the areas assigned for cleaning. It means when Lorenzo's associates see you, they'll treat you with the respect due to someone he's claimed as his. Responsibility. The word claimed made Ella's stomach flutter in a way she tried to ignore. I still want to work. I need to earn my place here. Then you'll work. But your role will change. Instead of general housekeeping, you'll be assigned to Lorenzo's private areas. His study, his bedroom, his personal spaces. Patricia raised an eyebrow. He's very particular about who he allows in those spaces. The fact that he's willing to have you there says a lot. Ella wasn't sure what to make of that. She'd been hired as a maid, had expected to spend her days cleaning bathrooms and doing laundry like the rest of the housekeeping staff. Now she was being told she'd be working in Lorenzo Castellano's private quarters, seeing the most intimate aspects of his life. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at dark water, knowing she was about to jump but unable to see what waited below the surface. What's he like? Ella asked. As an employer, I mean. I've only been here 3 weeks. Only saw him in passing before last night. Patricia considered the question carefully. He's exacting. Everything has to be done a specific way, his suits arranged by color, his desk organized with military precision, his coffee made with exactly 2 sugars and a splash of cream. He notices when things are out of place. That sounds exhausting. It is, but he's also fair. He pays well, never asks anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself, and takes care of his people. I've been with this family for 35 years, Ella. Lorenzo's father was a hard man, cold and calculating. Lorenzo has that same hardness when he needs it, but underneath there's something else. Something almost. Patricia paused, searching for the word. Protective. Like he's trying to build something better than what his father left him. Because of what happened to him. When he was young? Patricia's eyes sharpened. What did he tell you? Nothing specific. Just mentioned he understood. What it was like to have nowhere safe to go. Then, I'll tell you this much. Lorenzo knows what it's like to be powerless, to be afraid and alone with no one to turn to. His father died when Lorenzo was 15, left him with nothing but debts and enemies. He spent 3 years on the streets before his uncle took him in, taught him the business, helped him rebuild the family name. Patricia moved to the window, looking out at the gardens. Those 3 years changed him. Made him into someone who can't stand by when people are vulnerable and scared. It's why he does what he does. Why he protects people like you. Why he takes in strays and broken things and tries to fix them. I'm not broken, Ella said quietly. No, you're not. You're bent maybe, bruised, but not broken. Patricia turned back to face her. Lorenzo says that. It's why he's helping you. Before Ella could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and felt all the blood drain from her face. The text was from Marcus. Where are you? You didn't show up for your shift at the diner. If you ran, I will find you. And when I do, you're going to wish you hadn't. Ella's hands started shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. Patricia immediately took it from her, read the message, and her expression hardened. Stay here, Patricia ordered, already heading for the door. I'm getting Lorenzo. No, wait. But Patricia was already gone, moving down the hallway with surprising speed for a woman her age. Ella sank onto the bed, trying to control the panic rising in her chest. Marcus knew she was gone, was looking for her. The threats felt real and immediate even though she was safe behind Lorenzo's walls and security systems. She'd forgotten about her second job. Before starting at the Castellano mansion, she'd been working nights at a 24-hour diner to make ends meet. Had called in sick twice since starting here, but obviously hadn't called today. Marcus must have gone there, looking for her. Less than 3 minutes later, Lorenzo appeared in the doorway with Patricia behind him. His expression was calm, but Ella could see the tension in his shoulders, the cold fury in his eyes as he read the message. How did he get this number? Lorenzo asked, his voice dangerously quiet. It's my personal phone. He's always had it. Not anymore. Lorenzo held out his hand. Give it to me. What? Why? Because that phone is how he's tracking you. How he knows when you read his messages, when you're active. Probably where you are if he has the right apps installed. Lorenzo's tone was patient but firm. I'm going to have Tony dispose of it properly. We'll get you a new phone with a new number that Marcus doesn't have." Ella hesitated. That phone held everything: her photos, her contacts, her entire digital life. But Lorenzo was right. As long as she had it, Marcus had a way to reach her, to terrorize her with messages like this. She placed the phone in Lorenzo's hand. "Good," he said. "Now, did you tell Marcus about this job? Does he know you work here?" "No. I told him I was working at a hotel in the suburbs. I didn't want him showing up at work, making scenes, getting me fired. Smart. So he doesn't know to look for you here. Not unless he does what I did and searches employment agencies. They knew where I was placed." Lorenzo pulled out his own phone, made a call. "Dante, I need you to handle something. The employment agency that placed Ella Monroe, call them and make it clear that her records are confidential. If anyone comes looking for information about her, they call us first. Make sure they understand this isn't a request." He ended the call and looked back at Ella. "That's handled. Marcus can look all he wants, but he won't find you through official channels." "What about unofficial channels?" "He knows people, Mr. Castellano. Dangerous people. So the Y and mine are more dangerous." Lorenzo moved closer, his presence somehow both intimidating and comforting. "Ella, I need you to understand something. The meeting with Volkov tonight isn't just a conversation. It's a message. When I tell him you're under my protection, it becomes known throughout certain circles in this city. Marcus will hear about it. And when he does, he'll have to decide whether revenge is worth going against me. What if he decides as it is? Then he's stupider than I think, and stupidity gets corrected." Lorenzo's voice was cold. "Either way, you're safe. That's not negotiable." That evening, Ella found herself in the most surreal situation of her life, having dinner with Lorenzo Castellano in his private dining room before he left to threaten a Russian mobster on her behalf. The dining room was smaller than she'd expected, clearly designed for intimate gatherings rather than large parties. Dark wood table that could seat 8, plush chairs upholstered in burgundy velvet, and a chandelier that cast warm light over everything. Lorenzo sat at the head of the table, looking relaxed in black slacks and a charcoal shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. It was the most casual she'd seen him, and somehow it made him more attractive rather than less. His dark hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his fingers through it, and without the suit jacket he looked younger, less like a mob boss and more like just a man. A very dangerous, very handsome man who was about to go intimidate people for her. "You're staring," Lorenzo observed without looking up from the pasta. He was twirling on his fork. Ella felt heat rush to her cheeks. "Sorry, this is all very strange." "Strange how?" 24 hours ago, I was sleeping in your closet. Now I'm having dinner with you in your private dining room, while you prepare to go meet with organized crime figures about my abusive ex-boyfriend. It's not exactly a normal Thursday." Lorenzo's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "No, I suppose it's not." He set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Are you having second thoughts? About accepting my help?" "No. God, no." Aya shook her head emphatically. "I'm just trying to understand why you're doing this. You keep saying it's because I work in your house, but it feels like more than that. Why does it have to be more than that? Why? Because people don't usually append their entire evening to handle someone else's problems unless there's a personal stake involved." Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, studying her face like he was trying to decide how much truth to share. "When I was 16, he said finally, I watched a man beat his girlfriend in an alley behind a restaurant where I was washing dishes for cash. He had her by the hair, was slamming her head against a dumpster while she screamed for help. Ella's breath caught. Everyone else just walked by. Didn't want to get involved, didn't want trouble, but I couldn't." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I couldn't just stand there and watch. So I hit him with a piece of pipe I found, hit him hard enough that he stopped moving. The girl ran. I don't know if she made it somewhere safe or if he found her again later. I never saw either of them after that night." "How old was she?" "Young. 19, maybe 20. She had this look in her eyes that I recognized because I'd seen it in the mirror. Pure terror mixed with hopelessness." Lorenzo's voice was soft now, almost distant. "I think about her sometimes. Wonder if I did enough, if hitting him once was sufficient, or if I should have made sure he could never hurt anyone again. You saved her life that night. Maybe. Or maybe I just delayed the inevitable." He refocused on Ella. The point is, I decided a long time ago that when I have the power to help someone who can't help themselves, I do it. Not because I'm a good person, I'm not, but because I remember what it felt like to be powerless, and I refuse to be that person who just walks by. The honesty in his words hit Ella like a physical blow. This wasn't just about codes or rules or maintaining his reputation. This was personal. Deeply, fundamentally personal. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not walking by." "You're welcome." Lorenzo stood, checking his watch. "I need to leave soon. Tony will be here with you while I'm gone, along with 4 other security personnel. You're safe here, Ella, but I need you to promise me you won't leave the house until I get back." "I promise." She paused. Will you be safe? At this meeting?" Something flickered in his expression that might have been surprise. "Are you worried about me?" "Of course I am. You're doing this because of me. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. Volkov's not stupid enough to try anything at a public meeting in neutral territory. This is business, not a war." Lorenzo moved closer, and Ella caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and woodsy that made her stomach flutter. "But I appreciate the concern. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone in the dining room with half-eaten pasta and a heart that wouldn't stop racing. Santino's was exactly the kind of place Lorenzo preferred for meetings like this. Public enough to discourage violence, private enough to allow frank conversation, and owned by someone who owed Lorenzo enough favors to ensure discretion. The restaurant occupied a corner building in Little Italy, all exposed brick and dim lighting, and the smell of garlic and tomato sauce that made Lorenzo's mouth water, despite the tension coiling in his gut. He arrived 15 minutes early, as was his habit, and was shown to a private room in the back. Dante Romano was already there, looking every inch the consigliere in his navy suit and wire-rimmed glasses. At 53, Dante had been advising the Castellano family since Lorenzo's father was alive. He was smart, ruthless when necessary, and had kept Lorenzo out of federal prison more times than either of them could count. "You sure about this?" Dante asked as Lorenzo settled into his chair. "Volkov's not going to like being told how to handle his people. Volkov's going to like the alternative even less." Lorenzo accepted the glass of wine the waiter poured, waiting until they were alone again before continuing. "This isn't negotiable, Dante. The girl's under my protection now. After one day? After finding her sleeping in my closet covered in bruises. Yes, after one day." Dante sighed. "You know what people are going to think. I know exactly what they're going to think. And I don't care." Lorenzo took a sip of wine. "Ella Monroe is under my protection. That's all anyone needs to know." "Lorenzo, no." Lorenzo's voice hardened. "I'm not having this conversation. Not with you. Not with anyone. My decision is made." Dmitri Volkov arrived at 9:03, late enough to make a statement, but not late enough to be insulting. He was in his mid-50s, stocky and balding, with cold blue eyes and the kind of face that had seen too much vodka and too many winters. 2 bodyguards flanked him, large men with the dead-eyed look of professional muscle. "Castellano," Volkov said in heavily accented English, extending his hand. "Thank you for meeting on such short notice." Lorenzo shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the way Volkov's eyes assessed him. Calculating odds, weighing risks. Good. That meant he was smart enough to understand the situation. "Sit." Lorenzo gestured to the chair across from him. "Your men can wait outside. Dante stays." Volkov's bodyguards looked to their boss, who nodded. After they'd left and it was just the 3 of them, Volkov settled into his chair and accepted a glass of wine from the waiter. "So," Volkov said once they were, "what is so important that Lorenzo Castellano himself calls a meeting?" "One of your employees," Lorenzo said without preamble. "Marcus Reeves. He works security at Voltage. I know who works for me. Then you know he has a problem. He likes to put his hands on women, specifically his ex-girlfriend, who now works in my household." Volkov's expression didn't change. "A man's private life is his own business. It becomes my business when the woman in question is under my protection." Lorenzo's voice was calm, conversational, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. "Marcus has been terrorizing Ella Monroe for months, beating her, threatening her, making her life a nightmare. That ends now. Ends how? Marcus gets fired from Voltage. He gets told in no uncertain terms that Ella is off limits. And if he's smart, he leaves Chicago entirely and starts over somewhere else. Volkov took a long sip of wine, his eyes never leaving Lorenzo's face. You come into my city, tell me, how to run my business, how to handle my employees? This is very presumptuous, Castellano. Your city? Lorenzo's smile was cold. Dmitri, let's not play games. You run a few clubs and have some cops on your payroll. That doesn't make this your city. You're a guest here, same as me. The difference is, I've been a guest a lot longer and have significantly more friends than you do. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining the situation. There's a difference. Lorenzo leaned forward slightly. I don't want a war with you, Dmitri. You're not worth the trouble. But I will have one if you force my hand by protecting Marcus Reeves. So I'm giving you a choice. Handle your employee problem. Or I'll handle it for you. And trust me, you won't like my methods. The room was silent except for the muted sounds of the restaurant beyond the closed door. Volkov's expression had gone cold, calculating. Lorenzo could practically see him weighing options. Considering whether his pride was worth the potential consequences. This girl, Volkov said finally, she must be very special for you to risk so much. She's under my protection. That's all that matters. You're sleeping with her. My relationship with Ella is none of your concern. Lorenzo's voice hardened. What is your concern is whether you want to keep doing business in this city. Because if you protect Marcus, if you allow him to continue terrorizing someone under my protection, I will make sure every club you own faces inspections, raids, and enough legal trouble to shut them down permanently. Your cops won't help you mine or higher up the chain. Dante pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. We've documented Marcus's history, assaults, threats, violence. 12 different women over the past 8 years have reported him for domestic abuse. Most of those reports were buried because of you vouching for him, which means if any of this becomes public, you're liable as an enabler. Volkov opened the Daller folder, his expression darkening as he flipped through the pages. Where did you get this? I have resources. The question is, what are you going to do with the information? For a long moment, Volkov said nothing. Then he closed the folder and looked at Lorenzo with something that might have been respect. You're serious about this? Completely. And if I agree? If I fire Marcus, tell him to leave the girl alone? Then we continue our cordial relationship. Your clubs stay open. Your operations continue without interference from me. We coexist peacefully, as we have been. And if Marcus doesn't listen, if he goes after this girl anyway, then I handle him, permanently, and you pretend you never heard his name. Lorenzo's eyes were cold, but that's only if he's stupid enough to ignore both our warnings. I'm hoping he's smarter than that. Volkov drained his wine glass, then stood. Marcus will be fired tomorrow. I will make it clear that the girl is not to be touched. But, Castellano, understand this. I do this as a professional courtesy, not because I fear you. We are equals in this city. Of course. Lorenzo stood as well, extending his hand. I appreciate your cooperation. They shook, and Lorenzo could feel the tension in Volkov's grip. The Russian didn't like being backed into a corner, didn't like being forced to choose between pride and pragmatism. But he was smart enough to choose pragmatism, which was all Lorenzo needed. After Volkov left, Dante let out a long breath. That could have gone worse. It could have gone better. He's going to be a problem eventually. You didn't give him much choice. I gave him the only choice that matters. Cooperate or suffer the consequences. Lorenzo pulled out his phone, sending a quick text to Tony to let him know the meeting was done. Volkov understands power. He respects it, even when he doesn't like it. As long as we're stronger than him, we won't have trouble. And when Marcus gets fired, when he realizes why, then we find out if he's smart or stupid. Smart men survive. Stupid men become object lessons. They left the restaurant together, stepping out into the cool Chicago night. Lorenzo's car was waiting at the curb, Tony in the driver's seat. As they pulled away from Santino's, Lorenzo allowed himself to feel a small measure of satisfaction. The first step was complete. Marcus would be fired, warned off, given every chance to walk away and start over somewhere else. If he took that chance, everyone survived. If he didn't, well, Lorenzo had made promises to Ella. And Lorenzo Castellano always kept his promises. It was past 11 when Lorenzo returned to the mansion. The house was quiet, most of the staff already retired for the night. He made his way upstairs to check on Ella, finding Tony posted outside her door. "Any problems?" Lorenzo asked quietly. "None. She's been in her room all evening. Think she fell asleep around 10. Tony paused. "How'd it go with Volkov?" He agreed. "Marcus gets fired tomorrow, warned to stay away from Ella. If he's smart, that'll be the end of it. And if he's not smart, then we make sure he can't hurt anyone ever again." Lorenzo glanced at Ella's closed door. "Get some rest, Tony. I'll keep watch for a while." After Tony left, Lorenzo settled into the chair, positioned in the hallway, where he could see both Edge's door and the staircase. It was a position he'd occupied many times over the years, watching over people under his protection. But this time felt different somehow. Maybe it was the image of Ella curled up in that closet, so small and scared. Maybe it was the bruises he'd seen on her skin, evidence of violence that made his blood boil. Or maybe it was something simpler and more dangerous. The way she'd looked at him over dinner, with trust in her eyes despite every reason to be afraid. Lorenzo didn't make a habit of getting personally involved with the people he protected. Emotional distance was necessary. Professional boundaries existed for good reasons. But Ella Monroe was already under his skin in ways he hadn't anticipated. He told himself it was just the protector instinct, the same drive that had made him hit that man with a pipe when he was 16. Told himself there was nothing more to it than fulfilling his code, keeping someone safe because he had the power to do so. But sitting in that hallway at midnight, listening to the quiet sounds of Ella breathing safely behind her locked door, Lorenzo knew he was lying to himself. This was already more complicated than simple protection. And complicated, in his experience, was just another word for dangerous. 3 days passed in relative peace. Edge settled into her new routine, working in Lorenzo's private spaces with a nervous efficiency that gradually relaxed into something more comfortable. She learned his preferences, how he liked his coffee, the precise way his desk should be organized, the quiet hours in the morning when he premiere, didn't want to be disturbed. She also learned things about him that had nothing to do with work, that he read poetry late at night when he thought no one was watching, that he called his sister in New York every Sunday morning without fail, that he had a scar on his left shoulder blade from a knife fight when he was 17, and he sometimes touched it absently when he was thinking through difficult problems. Patricia had been right. Lorenzo was exacting, but he was also fair. He thanked her for small things, noticed when she was tired, and never once made her feel like she was just a servant in his house. He treated her like a person who mattered. It was dangerously easy to forget why she was really here, to forget that she was hiding from a violent ex-boyfriend, that Lorenzo had threatened a Russian mobster on her behalf, that this entire situation existed in the shadow world of organized crime, where violence was currency and loyalty was bought with blood. On the third morning, Ella was organizing Lorenzo's bookshelf. He'd asked her to arrange his collection by author rather than subject, when she heard raised voices from the hallway. "I don't care what your boss says." A man's voice, angry and slurred. "I know she's here. I know Castellano's hiding her. Let me through or I'll..." Edge's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. Marcus. She dropped the book she'd been holding and backed away from the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. No, this wasn't possible. Volkov was supposed to have handled this. Marcus was supposed to have been warned off. The voices grew louder, closer. Ella looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, somewhere safe. Her eyes landed on the closet. Not the supply closet where Lorenzo had found her, but the one in his bedroom where he kept his suits and shirts. Without thinking, she ran into Lorenzo's bedroom and dove into the closet, pulling the door shut behind her. The space was full of expensive clothing that smelled like his cologne, and she pressed herself into the back corner behind a row of suits, trying to make herself invisible. She heard Lorenzo's bedroom door slam open. "Where is she?" Marcus roared. "I know she's in here somewhere. Ella, get out here right now. Get the hell out of my bedroom." Lorenzo's voice was ice-cold fury. Ella had never heard him sound like that, not angry, but something far more dangerous. Controlled rage that promised violence. "Now. Not until I get my girlfriend back. You have no right to keep her from me. Your ex-girlfriend, who's under my protection. And you have about 10 seconds to leave before I have my men throw you out." Your protection? Marcus laughed, but it sounded unhinged. She's mine, Castellano. Mine. You can't just take what belongs to me because you're some big-shot mobster who thinks he owns this city. Ella heard a scuffle, the sound of bodies hitting furniture. She pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making any sound, terror flooding through her veins. If Marcus found her, if he got past Lorenzo's security. Tony, Lorenzo shouted. Get him out of here. More sounds of struggle. Marcus cursing, threatening, his voice growing more distant, as he was presumably dragged from the bedroom. But Ella couldn't make herself move, couldn't make herself leave the safety of the closet, even though she knew Marcus was being removed from the house. The closet door opened. Ella flinched back, but it was Lorenzo who stood there, his expression softening when he saw her huddled in the corner. He's gone, Lorenzo said quietly. You're safe. How did he find me? Ella's voice came out as a broken whisper. You said, Volkov said. Come here. Lorenzo held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Ella took it, letting him pull her out of the closet. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. Lorenzo guided her to sit on the edge of his bed, then crouched in front of her, hands resting gently on her knees. Marcus was fired from Voltage 2 days ago, just like Volkov promised. But apparently getting fired made him angry enough to start looking for you. He followed one of my staff members from a grocery store, watched to see where they were going. So he knows I'm here. He knows where to find me. He knows where my house is. He doesn't know you're staying here versus just working here. Lorenzo's voice was calm, reassuring. And after what just happened, he won't be getting close again. I'm doubling security, putting armed guards at every entrance, installing additional cameras. He won't make it past the front gate next time. Next time. Aya's laugh was slightly hysterical. You think there's going to be a next time? I know there will be. Men like Marcus don't give up easily. They feel entitled to what they think belongs to them. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. But I also know that every time he tries, we'll be ready. And eventually, he'll either give up or make a mistake big, enough that I can handle him permanently. Ella looked at him, this dangerous man who'd somehow become her protector, her anchor in a storm that kept trying to drown her. I'm putting you in danger. Your staff. Your home. Maybe I should just leave. Go somewhere far away where Marcus can't find me. That's one option. Lorenzo stood, moving to the window. You could run, change your name, start over in a new city, spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder wondering if today's the day he catches up to you. What's the other option? Lorenzo turned back to face her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. You stay here, under my protection, and we make it clear to Marcus that you're not just some woman who works in my house. You're mine, completely off limits, untouchable. How would we make that clear? By me claiming you publicly, in front of my associates, Volkov's people, everyone who operates in the circles where Marcus might look for sympathy or help. Lorenzo moved closer. It would mean becoming part of my household in a more official capacity, not just a maid I'm protecting, but someone under my direct care, my responsibility in every sense. Aya's heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear now. What would that look like? Specifically, you'd move into the family wing of the house, attend events with me when appropriate, be seen as someone important to me. Someone attacking would bring severe consequences. He paused. It would also mean Marcus would see you as truly lost to him, no longer available, no longer his to reclaim. It might make him angrier in the short term, but in the long term, it would force him to accept reality. Or it might make him desperate enough to do something stupid. Then he'd be dealt with accordingly. Lorenzo's voice was matter of fact. I'm not going to lie to you, Ella. This situation is dangerous. Marcus is unstable and violent. But running won't make you safer. It'll just make you alone when he finally catches up to you. Ella thought about the past 3 days, about feeling safe for the first time in months, about sleeping through the night without nightmares, about the way Lorenzo looked at her sometimes, like she was someone worth protecting, worth caring about. She thought about running again, about starting over in a new city where she'd know no one and have nothing, about spending her life afraid, waiting for Marcus to appear out of nowhere and finish what he'd started. Okay, she said quietly. I'll stay. I'll whatever you think is best to make Marcus understand. He needs to leave me alone. I'll do it. Something flickered in Lorenzo's eyes. Relief? Satisfaction? Something else she couldn't quite name? You're sure? I'm terrified. But I'm more terrified of the alternative. Ella stood, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. You've given me more safety in 3 days than I've had in the past year. I trust you, Mr. Castellano. Lorenzo. His voice was soft. If we're going to do this, you should call me Lorenzo. The use of his first name felt intimate in a way that made Ella's stomach flutter. Lorenzo, then. He nodded once, decisive. I'll have Patricia help you move your things to the room next to mine. And Ella? This is going to work. Marcus Reeves won't touch you again. I promise. Word spread quickly in the circles that mattered. By that evening, every associate of Lorenzo Castellanos' organization knew that Ella Monroe was under his direct protection. By the next morning, Volkov knew. And by that afternoon, so did Marcus. Ella watched from the second-floor window as Marcus appeared at the front gate, screaming obscenities at the security guards who refused to let him pass. He looked worse than she'd ever seen him unshaven, wild-eyed, like he hadn't slept in days. Let me see her, Marcus yelled, his voice carrying across the grounds. Ella, I know you're in there. You think you can hide behind him? Forever? You think he's going to protect you? Tony appeared at Ella's side, his expression grim. Boss wants you away from the windows. I want to see what he does. That's not a good idea. I need to see. Ella's voice was firm. I need to know what we're dealing with. Tony sighed, but didn't force her to move. They watched as Marcus continued his tirade, threatening the guards, threatening Lorenzo, threatening anyone who got between him and what he considered his property. Then Marcus pulled out a gun. Get down! Tony shoved Ella to the floor just as the first shot rang out. Glass shattered somewhere on the first floor. More shots followed, rapid and wild, Marcus firing blindly at the mansion. Ella heard shouting, running footsteps, the sound of returning gunfire. Her ears rang from the noise, and she couldn't seem to make her body move. She was frozen on the floor while chaos erupted around her. Tony spoke urgently into his radio in Italian. Within seconds, Lorenzo appeared in the hallway, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. Take her to the safe room, Lorenzo ordered Tony. Then to Ella. Go with him. Now. What about you? I'm handling this. Lorenzo's voice left no room for argument. Go. Tony pulled Ella to her feet and half carried her down the hallway to what looked like a regular closet, but opened to reveal a reinforced steel door. Beyond it was a small room with concrete walls, security monitors, and enough supplies to survive a siege. Stay here, Tony said, settling her into a chair. Don't come out until someone comes to get you. Then he was gone, the steel door closing with a heavy thunk that made Ella feel like she'd been sealed in a tomb. She stared at the security monitors, watching in horror as the situation outside unfolded. Marcus had taken cover behind his car, still firing sporadically at the mansion. Lorenzo's security team had surrounded him, weapons drawn, but they weren't shooting back. They were waiting for something. Lorenzo appeared on one of the monitors, walking out the front door with his hands visible and empty. What was he doing? He was going to get himself killed. Ella wanted to scream, to tell him to get back inside, but there was no intercom system in the safe room. She could only watch helplessly as Lorenzo approached the gate, standing in clear view of Marcus and his gun. Marcus Reeves. Lorenzo's voice carried clearly through the outdoor speakers. You have two choices. You can put down the gun and walk away, or you can keep shooting and my men will return fire. I guarantee they're better shots than you are. Give me Ella. Marcus screamed. She's mine. You have no right. She's not yours. She was never yours. You lost any claim to her the first time you hit her. Lorenzo's voice was cold. Put down the gun, Marcus. This is your last chance. For a moment, Ella thought Marcus might actually comply. He lowered the gun slightly, his face crumpling. Then something shifted in his expression, pure rage replacing whatever momentary sanity he'd found. He raised the gun again, aiming directly at Lorenzo. 3 shots rang out simultaneously. Marcus dropped like a puppet with cut strings, the gun falling from his hand as he crumpled to the ground. Ella's stomach lurched. She pressed her hand over her mouth, trying not to be sick. Marcus wasn't moving. There was blood spreading across the driveway, dark and wrong. Was he dead? Had Lorenzo's men just killed him? The monitors showed Tony and 2 other men approaching Marcus carefully, weapons still drawn. Tony crouched beside the fallen man, checked for a pulse, then spoke into his radio. The safe room door opened. Lorenzo stood there, his expression carefully neutral. He's alive. Wounded, but alive. Ambulance is on the way. You shot him. Edge's voice came out flat, emotionless. Shock, probably. My men shot him, after he aimed a weapon at me and refused multiple orders to stand down. Lorenzo moved into the safe room, crouching in front of Ella. Are you all right? I don't know. She felt numb, detached from her body. Is this real? Did this really just happen? Yes. And now the police are going to be involved. Detectives will want statements from everyone. The good news is we have security footage showing Marcus firing first, showing us trying to de-escalate, showing clear self-defense. He'll be arrested as soon as he's released from the hospital. He's going to jail? He's going to prison. Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment. With his history and the evidence we have, he's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. Lorenzo's voice softened. It's over, Edja. He can't hurt you anymore. The words should have brought relief. Instead, Ella felt tears streaming down her face. Not sadness, not really, but the release of months of tension and fear all at once. Lorenzo pulled her into his arms, and she let herself collapse against his chest, sobbing while he held her steady. His hand stroked her hair, his voice murmuring reassurances she couldn't quite hear over her own crying. When she finally calmed enough to breathe normally, Ella pulled back and looked up at Lorenzo. Thank you. For protecting me. For not letting him. You don't have to thank me. Lorenzo's thumb wiped away her tears with surprising gentleness. I told you from the beginning, you're mine to protect. That's not going to change. There was that word again. Mine. But this time, it didn't feel possessive or controlling. It felt like a promise. Like safety. Like coming home after being lost in the dark. The next 3 weeks were a blur of police interviews, legal proceedings, and newspaper headlines. Marcus survived his injuries, but was arrested the moment he was stable enough to leave the ICU. The media had a field day with the story. Violent ex-boyfriend attacks prominent businessman's home in stalking incident. Lorenzo's lawyers handled everything with practiced efficiency, ensuring the narrative focused on Marcus's violence and Lorenzo's legitimate right to self-defense. Dmitri Volkov issued a public statement distancing himself from Marcus Reeves, calling the man a disturbed individual who deceived us about his character. It was a calculated move to protect his own interests, but it had the effect of isolating Marcus completely. No one wanted to be associated with him now. Marcus's trial was scheduled for 6 months out, but his lawyer was already talking about plea deals. With the security footage, witness statements, and Marcus's history of violence, there was no scenario where he walked away free. Ella watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment, like she was observing someone else's life rather than her own. She'd gone from hiding in closets to being the center of a citywide news story, from being terrified every moment to finally feeling safe. Her room in the family wing was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. Patricia had helped her decorate it with warm colors and comfortable furniture that felt more like home than anywhere else ever had. She had her own bathroom, a walk-in closet, and windows overlooking the garden where spring had fully bloomed into summer. She also had Lorenzo as a neighbor. His bedroom was right next door, separated by a single wall. Some mornings she could hear him moving around, getting ready for the day. Some nights she could hear the quiet sound of music playing while he read before bed. The proximity should have been uncomfortable. Instead, it felt right, safe. Her role in the household had shifted dramatically. She still helped with light housekeeping in Lorenzo's private spaces, but more and more, Patricia was training her in household management, teaching her how to coordinate staff schedules, manage vendor relationships, handle the logistics of running an estate this size. You're a natural at this, Patricia said one afternoon, as they reviewed the rent, a month's expenses. You have an eye for detail and people respect you. That's rare. I'm just doing what you tell me to do. No, you're anticipating what needs to be done before I tell you. That's different. Patricia smiled. Lorenzo was right about you. Right about what? That you're stronger than you think. That you deserve better than what you've been settling for. Ella didn't know how to respond to that. She'd spent so long just trying to survive that she'd forgotten what it felt like to actually thrive. But here, in Lorenzo's house, under his protection and Patricia's mentorship, she was beginning to remember. She saw Lorenzo every day, sometimes multiple times. They had breakfast together most mornings, discussing plans for the day while they drank coffee and ate Patricia's exceptional cooking. They had dinner together most evenings, conversations ranging from current events to philosophy to embarrassing stories from their childhoods. Ella learned that Lorenzo had a wicked sense of humor when he let his guard down, that he was surprisingly well-read, with opinions on everything from Dante to Dostoevsky, that he called his sister Gabriella every Sunday without fail and teased her mercilessly about her terrible taste in boyfriends. She also learned that the stories about him were both true and misleading. Yes, he ran an organization that operated outside the law. Yes, he'd done things that most people would consider morally questionable at best. But he also donated anonymously to women's shelters throughout Chicago, funded scholarships for kids from rough neighborhoods, employed people who'd been written off by society and gave them second chances. His code, his rules about who deserved protection and who deserved punishment was rigid, but it came from a place of genuine principle rather than convenient justification. Lorenzo Castellano was not a good man by conventional standards, but he was a better man than most people who claimed that label. 6. Weeks after Marcus's attack on the mansion, Ella woke to find an envelope had been slid under her door. Inside was a handwritten note in Lorenzo's precise script. Rooftop at sunset. Wear something comfortable. Ella's heart did a complicated flutter. She and Lorenzo had settled into an easy friendship over the past weeks, but there were moments the way his hand would linger on her lower back, when he guided her through a doorway, the way his eyes tracked her movements across a room, the way her breath caught when he smiled that suggested friendship wasn't the only thing developing between them. She wore a sundress in soft blue that Gabriella had left behind on her last visit, along with sandals and a cardigan in case it got cool. When she made her way to the rooftop access at sunset, she found Lorenzo had transformed the space. String lights created a canopy of warm glow overhead. A small table had been set for two, with real china and crystal glasses. Soft music played from hidden speakers. And the view, the entire Chicago skyline spread out before them, Lake Michigan glittering in the fading light. Wow, Ella breathed. This is beautiful. I thought you could use a nice evening. Lorenzo pulled out a chair for her. You've been through hell and back these past 2 months. Figured you deserved something good. They ate dinner prepared by Patricia pasta with fresh vegetables, crusty bread, a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Ella's first car. They talked and laughed and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. As darkness fell and the city lights began to twinkle like earthbound stars, Lorenzo reached across the table and took Ella's hand. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. And I need you to just listen until I'm done. Can you do that? Ella nodded, her heart suddenly racing. When I found you in that closet 2 months ago, I thought I was just helping someone who needed protection. That's what I told myself. Anyway, but the truth is more complicated. Lorenzo's thumb traced patterns on the back of her hand. You got under my skin, Ella. Fast and completely. And somewhere between threatening Volkov and watching you laugh at my terrible jokes over breakfast, I realized something. He paused, amber brown eyes meeting her green ones directly. I'm falling in love with you. Maybe already have fallen. I know the timing's terrible, you just got out of an abusive relationship. You're dealing with trauma. You should probably take time to heal before jumping into anything new. But I can't keep pretending this is just about protection anymore. It's more than that. You're more than that. Ella's breath caught in her throat. Lorenzo, I'm not asking you to say anything back, he continued. I'm not asking you to make decisions or commitments you're not ready for. I just need you to know how I feel. And I need you to know that regardless of whether you feel the same way, you always have a place. Here, my protection isn't conditional on reciprocation. For a long moment, Ella couldn't find words. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what Lorenzo had just said. He was in love with her. This powerful, dangerous, complicated man had feelings for her. And the terrifying thing was, she felt the same way. I'm scared, Ella admitted finally. The last time I trusted someone, the last time I let myself love someone, he nearly killed me. I don't know if I'm ready to open myself up to that kind of vulnerability again. I'm not Marcus. Lorenzo's voice was firm but gentle. I will never raise my hand to you in anger. Never threaten you, control you, hurt you. That's not who I am. But you're dangerous. You've hurt people. I've done terrible things in my life, Lorenzo interrupted. I'm not going to lie about that. But there's a difference between the violence I commit in the course of business and the violence Marcus committed against you. I hurt people who've made themselves my enemies. I don't hurt people I care about. Never have, never will. Ella wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. What if I'm not ready? What if I need more time? Then you take all the time you need. Lorenzo lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I'm patient, Ella. I'll wait as long as it takes. They sat in comfortable silence, hands still linked across the table while the city glittered around them. Ella felt something shift inside her chest, not quite healing, but the beginning of it, the first steering of hope, that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to trust again, to love again, with a man who'd saved her life and then shown her what it meant to truly be protected. Not controlled, not possessed, but valued, cherished, kept safe not because she was property, but because she mattered. I'm not ready yet, Ella said finally, but I want to be. I want to try. Lorenzo's smile was radiant. That's all I'm asking. For a chance. Then you have it. Ella squeezed his hand. You have me, Lorenzo. However long it takes to get there, you have me. 3 months later, Marcus Reeves pleaded guilty to attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, stalking, and domestic violence charges. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 8. Ella attended the sentencing with Lorenzo beside her, his hand warm and steady in hers. When the judge read the sentence, when Marcus was led away in handcuffs, looking smaller and more pathetic than she ever remembered, Ella felt the last piece of fear finally dissolve. It was over. Really, truly over. That night, Lorenzo took her to the same rooftop where he'd confessed his feelings. The string lights still glowed overhead. The city still sparkled below. But this time, when they stood together watching the stars emerge, Ella didn't pull away when Lorenzo wrapped his arm around her waist. How do you feel? Lorenzo asked, quietly. Free, Ella said, and meant it. For the first time in over a year, I feel completely free. Good. Lorenzo turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders. You deserve freedom. You deserve safety and happiness and every good thing. Ella looked up at him, this man, who'd found her at her lowest point and refused to let her fall further, who'd protected her without asking anything in return, who'd been patient while she healed, giving her space to rediscover who she was beneath all the trauma and fear. She rose on her toes and kissed him. Lorenzo went very still for half a second, then responded with a gentleness that made Ella's heart ache. His hands cupped her face like she was something precious, breakable, worth treasuring. The kiss was sweet and slow and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. Was that okay? Ella asked, suddenly nervous. I'm sorry if I rushed. Don't apologize. Lorenzo's voice was rough with emotion. That was Ella. You don't know how long I've wanted to kiss you. Then do it again. He did. And this time, Ella let herself fall completely into it. Let herself trust that Lorenzo's hands would only ever hold her gently, that his strength would protect rather than harm. That loving him didn't mean losing herself. Over the following months, their relationship deepened naturally, organically. Stolen kisses in hallways, hands finding each other under the table during dinner, quiet nights reading together in Lorenzo's study. Ella moved into Lorenzo's room officially after Gabriella visited, and made a pointed comment about how ridiculous it was that they were maintaining separate bedrooms when everyone knew they were together. Patricia pretended to be scandalized but couldn't hide her smile when she saw them together. Tony just nodded approvingly and made a comment about how the boss seemed happier than he'd been in years. Ella's sister Emma came to visit, for Thanksgiving, meeting Lorenzo with barely concealed suspicion that gradually melted as she watched how he treated Ella. He's good to you, Emma said the night before she left, hugging her sister tight. That's all I care about. He's the best thing that ever happened to me, Ella admitted, even though it started in the worst possible way. Sometimes the best things come from the darkest places. You just have to be brave enough to reach for them. 1 year after Lorenzo found her sleeping in that closet, Ella stood in his study watching him work. He was negotiating something on the phone in rapid Italian, gesturing with one hand while writing notes with the other. He looked powerful and dangerous and completely in his element. When he ended the call, he looked up and caught her watching. What? Just thinking about how different my life is now. Ella moved closer, perching on the edge of his desk. A year ago, I was terrified, alone, sleeping in closets. Now you're managing my household, helping Patricia train new staff, and occasionally telling me when I'm being an idiot about business decisions. Lorenzo pulled her into his lap, arms wrapping around her waist. Best year of my life, by the way. Mine too. Edja kissed him softly. Thank you. For everything. You don't have to thank me for loving you. That's just what you do when you find someone worth keeping. 6 months after that, Lorenzo proposed on the same rooftop where everything had shifted between them. The ring was a simple solitaire diamond that caught the light beautifully, and Ella said yes before he'd even finished asking. They married in the gardens of the mansion in early spring, surrounded by the people who'd become Ella's family. Patricia cried through the whole ceremony. Gabriella served as maid of honor and made a speech about how she'd never seen her brother look at anyone the way he looked at Ella. Tony stood as best man and made a joke about how the boss had finally met someone stubborn enough to manage him. On their wedding night, lying in Lorenzo's arms, her husband's arms, Ella thought about the woman she'd been a year and a half ago. Broken, terrified, sleeping in closets because she had nowhere else to go. That woman had been found by someone who saw her worth beneath all the fear and trauma. Someone who'd protected her without asking for anything in return. Someone who'd been patient while she healed, and then shown her what real love looked like. What are you thinking about? Lorenzo asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. About closets, Edja said, and how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. Deep thoughts for our wedding night. I'm a deep person. She poked his ribs playfully. You married me knowing that. I married you knowing a lot of things. That you're strong and brave and smarter than you give yourself credit for. That you laugh at my terrible jokes and call me out when I'm being ridiculous. That you make terrible coffee but excellent conversation. Lorenzo's voice softened. That you're the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it started with me finding you in a closet at 2 a.m. Best closet I ever slept in. Lorenzo laughed, the sound rich and warm in the darkness. I love you, Mrs. Castellano. I love you too. Ella snuggled closer, feeling safe and warm, and exactly where she belonged. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for letting yourself be found. Outside, Chicago glittered in the darkness. Inside, in Lorenzo Castellano's arms, Ella Monroe now, Ella Castellano, finally understood what home felt like. Not a place, but a person. Not safety from the world, but safety with someone who'd fight the world to keep you protected. She'd been found sleeping in a closet, broken and afraid. She'd been saved by a man dangerous enough to scare away her demons and gentle enough to help her heal. And she'd discovered that sometimes the darkest moments lead us to the brightest futures. If we're just brave enough to reach for them,